Life in opposition really sucks. Surely, this must be what Kemi Badenoch is feeling as leader of the Conservatives in this parliament. Badenoch is a woman of power. She has known little else since her career took off as an MP. After a short spell as a newbie, Kemi was promoted to the government benches and has drunk from the fountain of decisive influence ever since. Her world was one of ministerial briefs, chauffeur-driven luxury cars, the flashing of camera bulbs, the cacophony of civil servants and journalists, and the crowded meeting schedules that come with governance. Look at the Northwest Essex MP now. Badenoch still retains the swagger of someone used to being in power. She exudes a supreme confidence in her own abilities, and even her allies say Badenoch is not afraid to ruffle feathers because she is not in politics to be popular but to get things done. The Conservative leader would only be human if she privately admitted to feeling a little incomplete without the daily exercise of government, to which she had grown accustomed. Badenoch was much better at this week's Prime Minister's questions. She was undeniably effective and on point in highlighting the government's hypocrisy towards the WASPy women and would have been comforted by the immediate press reaction to her performance. Kemi Badenoch has accused Labour of punching the British people in the face and planning to give away our hard-won Brexit freedoms, screeched the Sun newspaper. The Tory leader tore into Sir Keir Starmer at PMQs, warning his plans would hand power back to Brussels. Earlier in the week, the Sun opined that the PM's desire for a Brexit reset with Brussels looked pointless. According to the newspaper, Britain's relations with the EU are cordial enough. Our trade deal, while imperfect, works. There was more. Only the most gullible Europhiles would imagine the EU will renegotiate the current trade deal to our benefit without extracting a price. The Sun said this price would be fatal to British independence, hard won by the referendum and its aftermath. Readers then learned that the Labour government might be planning to sell out Britain and accept the EU's demands for greater fishing rights and free movement for the under-30s. This was too much for the Sun's opinion formers. They warned Sir Keir to reject these ridiculous demands out of hand. For nearly a decade, the newspaper has had to be economic with the truth about Brexit. Its standard lines are the following. Leaving the EU was both necessary and right. The British economy is doing very well, now that it is not in the single market. Britons have won back their freedoms, etc., etc. Where, for example, is the prominence given to research showing that these same Britons, under the influence of the Sun newspaper and others, literally imposed economic sanctions on themselves and future generations by opting for Brexit? What about this week's report that Brexit cost the British economy £27 billion in the first 2 years after leaving the European Union? The assertion by London School of Economics researchers that trade barriers had been a disaster for small businesses and had forced thousands to end their commerce with EU nations also received scant attention in the pages of The Sun. Meanwhile, over at the Daily Mail, there was much tickling of Badenoch's tummy for her tearing into Starmer over his treatment of pensioners. Positive headlines are, of course, encouraging, but for Badenoch, a woman used to being feted by foreign dignitaries at trade meetings when she was a minister of the Crown, this must be thin gruel indeed, after the sumptuous fare of office. But this is life now for the leader of the opposition. A good review here and there, to offset searing criticism elsewhere, all the time and applied to everything that she does. Winning the occasional sparring match with the Prime Minister doesn't change the drudgery of opposition. Nor is it likely to affect dramatically the current parliamentary arithmetic, or hasten the announcement of the next general election. All Badenoch can do is hope for events to turn in her favor. She can only wait for the government to collapse. Badenoch cannot pray for divine intervention and an act of God that will catapult her into office, because, as we learned this week, Badenoch has lost her faith and is now a cultural Christian. But no one should shed any tears for the Conservative leader. No one forced Badenoch to take on the leadership of her party last October. Indeed, she has twice sought her party's highest honor and must have been fully aware of the demands that come with the job. Moreover, the Conservatives' general election catastrophe set out plainly the long road ahead for both party and leader. Nevertheless, a mere 7 weeks into the job, and the size of the task facing Badenoch to remake and retool the Conservatives as a party of government is all too apparent. Those looking to the past to gain insight into Badenoch's current travails might settle on the experiences of William Hague. The now ennobled Baron Hague of Richmond was leader of the Tories during the last period of absolute Labour Party dominance. Hague, an essentially decent man, but nonetheless a stiff and untelegenic politician, who was uncomfortable in the media spotlight, struggled for political oxygen at a time when the Tony Blair and Gordon Brown psychodrama preoccupied the media. Like Badenoch, Hague was not cut out for the oversharing, please like me, permanent charm offensive that is required of opposition leaders. By contrast, Labour Party politicians, more used to being out of government, have fewer problems in adjusting to the chores of doing and saying anything to please voters. Labour shot callers like nothing better than indulging in the virtue signalling that powerlessness invites. Sir Keir Starmer was extremely accomplished in this role, as the waspy women have now found out to their cost. In opposition, the Tories went through Hague, the clueless quiet man Ian Duncan Smith, and the saturnine Michael Howard, before settling on David Cameron as the man to return them to government. Badenoch must awake at night in a cold sweat, brought to sudden consciousness by the terrible fear that she is fated to be a Tory party footnote like Hague, Howard, and Duncan Smith, or worse, be remembered as the Conservatives' Neil Kinnock. Kinnock, another person of destiny, was elected leader of the Labour Party in 1983. He took over a broken party which had suffered a landslide defeat at the hands of Margaret Thatcher. The party's moderates were inconsolable at the ascendancy of the hard left. An almighty media brimmed with disgust for Kinnock, a man it dismissed as a lightweight, ginger Welsh windbag, without answers to the country's decline that could match Maggie's strong medicine. Thatcher was unassailable, cheered to the rafters by the media as she pounced on, and then decimated, British industry, organised labour and the regions. Pundits were more than happy to train their guns on the opposition, flourishing their suggestions for the blue Labour alternatives to Kinnock. The Labour leader followed the press recipe for rebuilding his party and removed much that anchored Labour to its socialist roots. Kinnock's work was completed by his successor, Tony Blair. Only then was Labour deemed by the media to be fit for government. The Labour Party, and indeed British politics, have yet to recover from 40 years of careful grooming conducted by Murdoch, the Barclay brothers, Paul Dacre, Kelvin Mackenzie, and others. So, how should Kinnock and the 1980s Labour Party inform our understanding of Badenoch and modern conservatism? For a start, Badenoch should be under no illusion that she is the long-term darling of the British press. It gives her the prominence due to the most likely replacement for Sir Keir Starmer. But in truth, this is a relationship of convenience, with all the signs of strain present in a marriage where the parents agree to stay together for the sake of their children. The absurd GB News, Talk TV's multiple hours of dreadful programming and the consistent drivel served up in the pages of the Daily Mail, The Sun, and the Express newspapers, are convincing proof that for the first time in living memory, the bonkers section of Britain's media is further to the right of the Conservative Party. This might not be so much of a problem for Badenoch now, but it could be in the not-too-distant future. Politically, the press reflects more closely the views of the Reform Party. Both love a simplistic narrative. Both struggle to put down the crack pipe of foreigner bashing. Both wrap themselves in the British flag and adopt the look and feel of the everyday patriot, whilst doing the bidding of the moneyed elites. And whisper it softly, both may harbour suspicions that Badenoch may not be the best exemplar of the British way, nor the right fit to win over Redwall seats. This may explain why Boris Johnson is still in play, even after his serial misdemeanours, and it underscores the omnipresence of Nigel Farage. Just as Kinnock was dwarfed by the Thatcher giant, so the Farage factor casts its shadow over everything that Kemi Badenoch does, says, and hopes to achieve. Tory opposition leaders struggled against Tony Blair and his pomp, but Messrs. Hague, Howard, and Duncan Smith did not have to contend with a threat from their right flank. Nigel Farage, smiling into the camera, cigarette and pint in hand, flaunting his close friendship with Elon and Donald, projects the compelling certainty of a messianic political mission into the nation's living room almost on a daily basis. His unrivaled ability to claim the center stage in British politics must fill Badenoch's nightmares. Farage accounts for a full 20% of Reform's representation at Westminster, and yet, bizarrely, he is treated as a credible prime minister in waiting by the commentariat. Many a podcast asks breathlessly whether Farage is destined for number 10, Downing Street. The Sun newspaper reported that Nigel Farage is the favourite to replace Sir Keir Starmer as Prime Minister at the next election. It added that the Reform UK leader finds himself leading the pack to enter Downing Street, according to the latest odds. Farage has edged ahead of Tory leader Kemi Badenoch and Labour number 2 Angela Rayner as the firm favourite, Ladbrokes say. The Sun also told its readers that this year's general election was the most disproportionate in election history in the UK. Labour managed to double its number of seats from 202 to 411 but only received one-third of the vote. In contrast, Reform bagged only 5 seats but attained some 4 million votes. Britain's scribblers sent blood. As listeners to this podcast will know already, a select group of podcasters, journalists, and media personalities are beginning to circulate their disquiet about Badenoch as the Conservatives' leader. After this week's PMQs, the New Statesman reported that Badenoch had strayed even further out of her depth, in an anticlimactic showdown to end the year. In general, the press is not yet lampooning Badenoch with the merciless venom it brought to coverage of Neil Kinnock, but this could change, should Badenoch's Wednesday Westminster labours continue. Every week, the nation's punditocracy makes a job assessment based on Badenoch's PMQ's performance. When she misses more than she hits, the hacks hint that the leader may not be good enough. Rumours abound that Robert Jenrick has not given up his leadership ambitions. This only emboldens the media piranhas, who have grown accustomed to mayhem in the Tory ranks during the last years of Conservative rule, when prime ministers and cabinet personnel changed with a frequency rivaling Kim Kardashian's dresses. Badenoch is criticised for being policy light. Then she gets panned for having a sympathetic view of the flat tax, which reminds too many people of the Thatcher-slaying poll tax. Kemi just can't win. Badenoch is surely playing the long game on immigration, delaying her policy announcement until later in this parliament, in the belief that she might wrong-foot both Reform and the government. The Conservative leader may also hope that Nigel Farage shoots himself in the foot by overplaying his closeness to Trump, but she cannot allow herself to be blinded by the Reform blight. The government might still believe it has another year to plausibly blame the Conservatives for the country's economic problems. Then, if the slide in Sir Keir Starmer's popularity continues, it will be game on. Badenoch must have the Conservatives in fighting shape by then. In the meantime, Badenoch must accustom herself to the rites and rituals of opposition politics. She has no choice but to sit across the sofa from assorted daytime television hostesses, wittering on about her weight loss program since becoming Tory leader, or her power couple with hubby Hamish, or how she juggles children and politics. There will be meetings and rallies in front of the faithful, high-table events, and glamorous evening gown photo ops with the great and good. But all of this will come as mere crumbs of sustenance to a woman who built her leadership candidacy on being the engineer, builder, and fixer of things. What is there to rebuild when Kemi is surrounded by an amen chorus which believes that there is nothing wrong with the party? What needs fixing when the leader believes that current Conservative ideas and policy positions are generally sound? Does this explain why Badenoch's detractors accuse her of a lack of activity? Or is it boredom with the tiresome routines of opposition? In a November podcast, Baroness Ruth Davidson, the former boss of Scotland's Tories, hinted that Badenoch might be a lazy leader and counselled her to work harder. What Davidson wants is a better performance of leadership, irrespective of the circumstances. Granted, Kemi Badenoch is leader of the opposition, but she must look and behave like the Prime Minister in waiting. Badenoch surely agrees but may already be weary of the constant grind of talking without being listened to, or summoning journalists to events, knowing that some might not come because they have better and more important things to do than listen to the musings of a leader with just 120 MPs behind her. Must she really have a policy statement ready to go every week, that might generate good headlines, but lacks seriousness and will never become the business of the government? Badenoch has criticized Labour's top team for practicing student politics in opposition. This, she said, meant that Labour politicians were not ready when real power was thrust into their hands. Now Kemi Badenoch is in opposition herself and must live with irresponsibility for the nation's affairs and political irrelevance. Although the Conservative leader is not remotely interested in the politics of protest, week after week, and seemingly, for the next 4 years at least, this is all she will ever have to do. Kemi Badenoch, a woman of power, reduced to sniping from the sidelines, as others get on with more important things. Yes. Life in opposition really sucks. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please subscribe to the Our Masters Blankets YouTube channel and like and share this podcast. We really appreciate your support and we are grateful for your help in keeping these podcasts going. We'll be back soon with another episode of Kemi Can't Win. Hope you'll join us on the next one.